Today.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So as Josh mentioned, we're going to be talking about coding the law today. This is webinar number 4 of 5. So this is further into the process of policy surveillance, and we'll go over that shortly. So our learning objectives for today, we are going to define coding the law. And we are going to help you understand the difference between coding for legal assessments or cross-sectional assessments, which we've talked about in the past, but as a quick refresher, a cross-sectional assessment or study is one that is done at a specific point in time. And we're going to compare that to coding for policy surveillance or longitudinal studies, which take place over time and look at various iterations of the law over time. So we'll get more into that later. And then finally, we're going to introduce steps used to perform quality control on coding. And quality control will be the big focus of the final webinar, number 5. So we'll get to that at the very end of this presentation. So moving forward. So this is the policy surveillance process overview. So you may be familiar with this already if you've been on our previous webinars. We are currently at coding the law, which is in the bottom left-hand corner, but this is the policy surveillance process. So in our earlier webinars, we started at the top and went clockwise. So we did our background research, we developed our questions, we collected the law. So today is where everything starts to come together in terms of the questions and the legal text that you have. Another thing that we always note on this slide is that quality control permeates the entire process. So quality control will be discussed today, and it'll be discussed further in webinar 5. So in terms of coding the law, so as I mentioned before, this is where we're using the legal text that we collected to answer the questions that we developed. So the goal is to read, observe, and record the law as opposed to reading and then interpreting the law. So this is a thematic point that's come up many times. In policy surveillance and legal epidemiology, we're not interpreting the law, we're just trying to capture what's there. And then this diagram that you have here at the bottom really outlines our process leading up to today's webinar. So we've developed our questions, we've collected the laws, and now we are going to code the answers to our questions based on the collected law. And again, that final box will show you that this is really about answering the questions based on the law and doing as little interpretation as possible, ideally no interpretation. So we'll keep moving. So in terms of the difference between coding for a legal assessment versus coding for policy surveillance, I mentioned the difference between a legal assessment, which is a cross-sectional study, and policy surveillance, which is longitudinal before. But the big difference here is that when we're coding for legal assessments, we code the law once for each jurisdiction because a legal assessment or a cross-sectional study is really a snapshot in time. So you're really only answering and coding questions at one point in time. This is different than policy surveillance or longitudinal studies where you're doing this over a period of time. And there are going to be multiple versions of the law, and each of those versions of the law is going to be coded for each jurisdiction, and that's going to represent a different point in time. So researchers are going to code a new record of law for each amendment made to the law, and longitudinal coding is going to show the law's evolution over time. So if you go on our website on Law Atlas and you were to go and find a longitudinal study, you can see how laws change over time and how we've coded for changes in law over time. And the reason we try to emphasize doing longitudinal studies is because you can look at how laws change over both space in terms of the geographic area and over time using amendments like the ones that I just discussed. So this is an example of how we code for legal assessments. So on the left, we have the question. So this is a question that you would have developed in the question development process. And then in the middle, you have the legal text that you would use to code the question. And then on the right, you have your response. So to go over the question just briefly, so the question is asking what behaviors are restricted while driving. And then you have your 4 answer choices. This is a check all that apply question. And in the middle, you have the legal text. So you would look to the legal text to try to answer this question. And then if you look at the underlined sections of the law in the legal text, that would lead you to answer choice A. So you would code handheld electronic messaging. And that's essentially how coding the law works. You're taking your questions which you developed, you're taking the legal text which you built, and then answering the questions based on the text, again, with no interpretation or as little interpretation as possible. You're just trying to capture the law in this process. So we will keep moving forward. So in terms of coding for policy surveillance, this is an example of how you would code a longitudinal piece of data or for a longitudinal study. So on the left, you have one iteration of the law, and on the right, you have another iteration of the law. So for each time the law is amended, the new iteration must be coded to reflect that amendment. So previous records shouldn't be overwritten. So whatever program you're using to code, you should be adding in new records to show the evolution of law over time. So these different versions of laws, we call them iterations of the law, and those represent laws at a specific point in time. So let's just quickly look through this example. So on the left, based on the law in 2001, you would code $100 as your answer based on the law in 2001. But then on the right, you have a second iteration of that same law, and your answer would change there to $50 to $150 because the law changed and you would be coding differently for that second iteration. So that is how coding for policy surveillance or for longitudinal studies would work.
And it's important to note, just to stress that iteration 2 does not replace iteration 1 in terms of we're not going to be, the idea here is we don't want to delete. We want records of iteration 1 and iteration 2 in posterity because we want to see the difference and the change between those two. So it's a situation not where we're deleting our previous answer choice, but we're adding a new version of the answer choice based on the new version of the law.
Exactly. And this may seem a little abstract to you now if you haven't looked at this before, but I would highly recommend going on Law Atlas and looking at one of our longitudinal data sets because there you can look at changes over time because there's a slider on Law Atlas that allows you to look at the iterations of law over time. And you can see how different states change their laws and how our coding reflects those changes in laws. So this becomes a very rich and robust data set if you do a longitudinal study. So I'll keep moving forward. So now we are going to play a game. So I will be going through some questions, and you can follow along and try to answer the questions with us. So this is very similar to what we just went over. You just don't have the answer now, so that's what you're going to be working on. So on the left, we have our question. Our question here is how much marijuana may an in-state resident purchase? And then this is a check all that apply question. So you are going to look at the legal text now and come up with the answer and code based off of the legal text. So I will give you a few seconds to review the law and then come to a decision on how you would code. So the answer here, if you were to look at the text, would be A, 1 ounce. And that can be found in the legal text in the center of the slide. So we're going to do another example. So here, our question is, what are the limitations on sales of cottage food operations? So again, you're going to look at the legal text in the middle and then answer based off of that. And I'll give you another few seconds to look at the text. So if you're looking at answer choice D, you would be correct. That again can be found in the text. So the limit placed is 50,000 in gross annual sales.
So you'll notice that this question, you can see at the top the 2015 record specifying that this is representative of potential longitudinal coding question. If this was asking about the 2014 record, then the answer choice would have been $45,000. Similarly, if this was the 2013 record, it would have been $35,000. And this is, again, showing we need to look at those details and know which time period we're answering this question for when we're doing longitudinal coding like this.
Exactly. So next question. So the next question is, what is the duration of an emergency commitment? and you're going to look at the legal text in the middle and code off of that. So I will give you a few seconds. So based on the legal text, you would have coded C, 72 hours, and that can be found in the legal text. So next question. What does the state require on medical marijuana labels? And you're going to look at the legal text and code. And I will remind you that these are check all that apply questions. So that is a little bit of a hint. So here, based on the legal text, you would have coded both D and E because those are both found in the law.
Yeah, and just another aside here, should mention the fact that product, as you notice, product potency is one of the answer choices here, but it's never actually, there's no terminology in this legal text that uses the word product potency. We would code that based off of C, THC concentration, and CBD concentration, and this is an example of a situation where we would have previously made a coding decision or decided that and included that information in our research protocol that anytime we see THC concentration, CBD concentration, etc., we know that that, for our purposes, means product potency. So, you know, the other option would be to code it as THC concentration and explain it as such. But we have decided in this situation that product potency is our language that we're using to capture any sort of concentration information. So that again would be explained in the protocol, and that's another mention of how the use of the research protocol and why we keep those sort of details throughout the entirety of this process.
Exactly. So yeah, thematically it's really important to fall back on the protocol and keep that up to date. And when you come to coding decisions, like Josh mentioned, to record those, because sometimes there are things that may seem intuitive to you, but may not be intuitive to somebody that's reading looking through your data set as an outsider. So if you have a protocol that explains that out, then your data set can make more sense to somebody who's just getting acquainted with it. So we're going to move to the next question. So what are the qualifying symptoms for medical marijuana use? And this, again, is another check all that apply. So if you're looking at the legal text, you are probably seeing that the answer is A, B, C, and D. So all of those are present in the legal text. So this is one of those questions where you would code all.
Yeah, and this is another example of we don't do all of the above answer choices as part of this. Instead, we would have a check all that where you would select each individual answer choice so we get that information and that data.
Correct. And the reason for that is because a check all that apply on its own as an answer choice doesn't give you enough context to understand what is actually in the law. So you actually want to individually check off each of those categories or each of those answer choices. So we will move to the next question. What is the minimum age for caregivers? So I'll give you a second to look at the legal text and then code based off of the text. So you will see here in the middle of the legal text, the answer to the question is right there. It is answer choice B, 18 years old. So now, as Josh mentioned at the beginning, you should have access to the exercise. So you can pull up those documents, and we will give you some time to read through the documents and work through the exercise.
Yeah, and just to be clear, so you have two documents, two Word documents that you have access to on the webinar homepage. So the first is the legal text that we're going to use to code the law. So you have, I believe, 3 versions of the law from 2 different jurisdictions. And this is a longitudinal coding process. And then on the other side, you have a document that basically represents an Excel spreadsheet if you were to code this in Excel. So you have your state, your effective date, your iteration number, and then the questions that you are meant to answer and cite. Remember, we turn our answers into data, so a yes is 1 and a 0 is no in this situation. So take some time, read the legal text that we've supplied, and then see if you can fill out the question document with your answers and citations, and we'll review on the other side. Let us know if you have any questions throughout this process. Thank you. Hey everyone, hope it's going well. We're going to get back together in 5 to 10 minutes, so continue with your coding and let us know if you have any questions. Thank you.
All right, we're going to get back to it. So we're going to review the answers with you. So hopefully you had enough time to go through this. So we're going to start with the first record. So we coded 2 different states here. The first state is Colorado, so we have 1 record for Colorado. So I'm going to walk you through those answers. So in Colorado, you have the 1 law, and if you look at the first question, you have, does the state law specifically address youth sports TBIs? You coded 1 here, which is a yes, and then you have your citation to show how you got to your answer. Then the next question, does the law specify requirements for a return to learn policy? Here you coded 0, or should have coded 0, which is a no. So because you coded no, there's no citation. And then the following question is a child question. So because you answered the previous question no, you wouldn't answer any of these. Then moving to the next question, does the law specify requirements for return to play policy? Here you should have coded 1 or a yes. You have your citation because you always have to show your work and where you got your yes answer from. And then your final question, you coded 0 or should have coded 0, which is a no, and you don't need a citation for your no coding. So this is where it gets interesting. So now for Virginia, you have 2 records, and really what we're trying to show with the 2 records is how law changes over time. So this is more part of your longitudinal data sets, which we've talked about a lot today. So the big trend to notice across these 2 rows is that the answers are going to change when there are changes to the law. So for the first question, that's going to remain the same. You coded yes for both of those. But for the next question, does the law specify requirements for return to learn policy? With the first record you have here for the first iteration, you coded 0 because in that past law, there was no law to code yes there. But in the new iteration, iteration 2, you would have coded yes because the law changed and now you can answer yes. So there you have your citation as well. So unlike the first Colorado record or the first Virginia record, now you can answer the child questions because you answered yes to the latest iteration of the Virginia law. And again, you would always cite whenever you code yes. And then for the final 2 questions all the way to the right, those answers would remain the same because the change didn't affect the coding there. So that should have been what you did with your coding exercise. So if there are questions on that, let us know. But otherwise, we will continue to move on. So now we are going to do a demonstration of our coding software. We use a website called Monocle. If you have questions about Monocle, that sort of thing, you can always email us. But we're going to do a quick look at Monocle so that you can see how we do coding. Because in the exercise that we just did, we did that on Excel. But there are software options as well.
So hopefully everyone can now see my Monocle page. So this is what Monocle looks like. It is a internet-based software that we use to code to do this process. So this is from our Right to Try Laws data set. So you can see here, and this software is, there's a free trial if you want to try it out as well. Otherwise, I believe it is a subscription service. But it's made for and it has been built for policy surveillance. So you can see on the left, you can add in your questions. You can add different, this one has who the coder is, a parent question of whether the state has a right to try law. Here is an example of a mutually exclusive categorical question, while here is a check all that apply question. So all of your answer choices can be entered here. They can be edited pretty easily. And then we are able to then add different records for different states. So this is a longitudinal project. So while Alaska only has 1 record because there's only 1 law that was in effect from 2014 through 2016, Alabama has 2 records because it was amended as of September 1st, 2015. So we can go in and look at that specific record and see, oops, I have to sign in, and see what that is like on Monocle. So here you can see this is in our Alabama record. We have our answers, our questions here. Here it is filled out. We can answer these questions, and then each one of these highlighted parts is a citation that can then be dragged over and brought into a specific answer choice. So that's how you would code the law. So all of the examples that we just did, instead of doing it on that Excel document that you did in this example and in this exercise, you would do that, and that's how we would do this without the Monocle. We would build it in an Excel spreadsheet, just like how you build that in, which was built in an Excel spreadsheet. You would do it on Monocle instead and answer these questions here with those citations. In addition, another great thing about Monocle is that it pushes out all of the data easily for you. So if you go to this export button, you can either export the standard or the statistical versions of all of the answer choices that you filled out in all of your records. Additionally, Monocle allows us to publish on our website or whatever website you need to on lawatlas.org, for example, and then here it gets published on our website as in this cool map form where I can go through and say, and use the time slider to look at how the laws change over time. See that in May 2015, only 7 jurisdictions had a right to try law, while now, a year later in May 2016, 24 jurisdictions had a right to try law. So we can track that change, track the different definitions of terminal illness, whatever is interesting to you. But this software is basically the software that we use at our shop to do policy surveillance, and we recommend similar, if you are interested in your own policy surveillance project, to contact them about them. Otherwise, though, we want to stress that you do not need to use the Monocle to do policy surveillance. As you saw in the exercise, that was all done in a Excel spreadsheet version, but that's a demonstration of what the coding software can do.
Great. So we will continue from there. If you have questions about Monocle, email us, reach out to us.
Yes, we can answer any questions you have about Monocle, or about, if you don't want to use Monocle, how you would set up your own Excel coding spreadsheet.
Exactly. As Josh said, policy surveillance can be done in many different ways. The tools you choose to use are up to you. So we will continue. So I want to stop for a second and see if there are any questions related to what we've covered so far. So feel free to message us. Otherwise, we will continue with a few more slides, and then we can wrap up early, actually.
Mm-hmm. If you have any questions, again, there's a chat box, and there's also a Q&A box. So if you have any questions for us, feel free to ask it. We'll respond over the webinar. But for now, we'll just continue.
We'll keep moving. So this is essentially a preview to the next and final webinar, where we will be talking about quality control and coding. So quality control is going to occur throughout the entire coding process. So the original coding is checked daily by the supervisor. So as we've discussed in previous webinars, there's a supervisor on each project, or there should be one, and the supervisor is going to check the original coding. Redundant coding is going to be assigned and then reviewed by the supervisors throughout the project. So another thing that we've talked about in past webinars, we tend to do everything redundantly, just for quality control purposes and to ensure that people are reaching the same conclusions. The redundant aspect of this is particularly important in terms of reducing this issue of interpretation. So if you've been on past webinars, and even on this webinar, we've talked about how what we're trying to do is capture the law, not interpret it. So by redundantly coding, you're really trying to minimize the interpretation piece and making sure that 2 different coders with 2 different mindsets and I guess looking at the same law would reach the same answer. So that's the importance of redundant coding in terms of reducing the interpretation factor. So the next bullet pretty much repeats what I just went over. Yeah, we are looking to ensure that we are all reaching the same answers. And then finally, we do statistical quality control. So in that process, we take a naive coder and we give them a sample of records for the project, and then we have them code. And again, the idea here is to have this naive coder look at these laws, look at these questions, and see if they're reaching the same answer, because ideally we're trying to minimize interpretation and just trying to capture exactly what's in the law. So that's a bit about QC and coding, and we will just move to wrap up. So in summary, coding the law consists of using the legal text you have collected to answer the questions you have developed. For legal assessments, you're going to code the law once for each jurisdiction, because legal assessments are cross-sectional and they're happening at a specific point in time. For policy surveillance, which is longitudinal, there's multiple versions of the law, and those are coded for each jurisdiction and at each different point in time. So if you want a quick summary of those things, if you look back at the exercise you just did, Colorado is a good example of a cross-sectional because it's at one point in time. Or it's a single record in a longitudinal study, whereas Virginia lets you actually see the change in the law over time, and the two Virginia records represent what a longitudinal study would look like. And then the goal of coding, as I've been talking about, is to read, observe, and record the law, and you're really minimizing interpretation, and that's done through all of the QC things that I just went over in the previous slide. So really you're just trying to capture what's in the law. And then finally, quality control is being applied to coding by a supervisor, assigning and reviewing original coding, redundant coding, and naive coding. So those are all in place in order to really support that third bullet under the first larger bullet. So really we're just trying to observe and record what's there. So final slide, we'll open it up for questions on the entire presentation. We'll be here for a little while. Feel free to message us. But otherwise, we'll see you next time.
Yes, we'll see you. We have our next one, which is our final advanced webinar in this series, which again, as Marcelo mentioned, is on quality control publication as well as updating data sets. So what to do in the future once you've completed a data set and you want to make sure it is staying up to date. Additionally, as I mentioned at the top, if anyone will be attending APHA in Philadelphia this weekend or early next week. We will also be there. It's here in our hometown. And so we would love to meet any of you and talk about policy surveillance and any policy surveillance projects you're interested in. Otherwise, yes, keep in touch. Email us, call us, tweet at us. Whatever, we're here to help. If you have, we offer technical assistance if you are interested in doing policy surveillance projects of your own or just have any questions in general. Otherwise, hope you have, if you don't have any questions for us now, feel free to contact us at any time, and have a great rest of your Tuesday. Thank you for joining us today. We'll stay on the line as we wait.